There's something about a new house that feels like a fresh start. New walls, new floors, a different smell in the air. It's supposed to mean change, growth, and new beginnings. But sometimes a new house doesn't feel like a beginning at all. Sometimes it feels like you've stepped into someone else's story, a story that never really ended. That's what tonight's stories are about. Real people, real homes, and the things that followed them after they moved in. These are 3 disturbing true new house horror stories, and once you hear them, you might never look at your own home the same way again. Let's start with the first one. It was late summer of 2018 when Claire and Ethan finally moved into their dream house, a 2-story colonial home in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Portland. They'd been saving for years, scrolling through listings night after night, dreaming of the moment they'd find the perfect place to settle down. And when they saw this house, they knew it was the one. It wasn't new exactly, it had been built in the 1970s, but it had recently been renovated. The floors were polished, the walls freshly painted, and the yard looked like something out of a home magazine. Claire especially loved the tall windows in the living room that let in soft morning light. For her, it wasn't just a house. It was a sign that life was finally falling into place. But the thing about old houses, especially ones that have seen families come and go for decades, is that sometimes they hold on to memories. And not all memories fade quietly. The first few days were ordinary. The moving truck came, boxes were unpacked, and Claire busied herself with decorating. She worked from home as a freelance designer, so she spent most of her time inside while Ethan went to work at his new job downtown. Every evening, he'd come home to the smell of dinner, and they'd sit on the back porch watching the sun dip behind the line of trees. Everything was perfect. Until the 4th night. It started small, a noise. Claire woke up around 2:13 a.m. to the faint sound of footsteps upstairs. At first, she thought maybe Ethan had gotten up to use the bathroom, but when she turned beside her, he was still there, fast asleep. The sound stopped as soon as she listened. She told herself it was probably the house settling. Old wood, temperature changes, nothing unusual. But the next night it happened again. And this time it was louder. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving from one end of the hallway to the other. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She listened for a few seconds, debating whether to wake Ethan. Then, suddenly, a soft creak, like the sound of someone leaning on the bedroom door. She froze. The room felt colder. The air felt still heavy. Then nothing. The next morning, Claire brushed it off. She didn't want to sound paranoid. When she told Ethan about it over breakfast, he laughed it off. Old house noises, he said, sipping his coffee. You know how it is, pipes, floorboards, maybe even raccoons in the attic. But that explanation didn't quite fit. The sound she heard wasn't random. It had rhythm, weight, like footsteps made by someone who knew where they were going. Still, she tried to ignore it. Days passed and life went on. But the strange feeling never left. She began to notice odd little things. The hall light she was sure she'd turned off would be on in the morning. A framed photo on the mantel would be slightly tilted. The old wooden rocking chair in the corner of the living room, the one that came with the house, would be facing a different direction. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in the basement, Claire found something that made her stop cold. Behind a stack of old paint cans was a small cardboard box sealed with yellowed tape. She opened it thinking it might be leftover tools or nails. Instead, she found photographs. Dozens of them. They were all Polaroids, faded but clear enough to see faces. Families, children, birthdays. But all taken inside this house. She could recognize the wallpaper, the living room archway, the staircase. The people looked happy, but the more she flipped through the photos, the more uneasy she felt. Because in the background of almost every photo there was someone else. A shadow. A figure. Sometimes standing behind a curtain. Sometimes just visible in the reflection of a mirror. Always the same shape, tall, dark, and human-like. Claire's chest tightened. She could feel her hands start to shake. She put the photos back in the box, closed it, and carried it upstairs to show Ethan that evening. But by the time he came home, the box was gone. She looked everywhere, the basement, the living room, the garage. Nothing. When she told Ethan, he gave her a puzzled look. Are you sure you didn't move it somewhere? I'm sure, she said. It was right here. I put it by the stairs. He sighed, trying to stay calm. You've been unpacking for days, Claire. Maybe you just mixed it up with one of the other boxes. She didn't argue, but she knew she hadn't. That box had been real. And whoever had taken it, or whatever, had been inside the house. That night she couldn't sleep. Every small sound made her tense. Around 1:47 a.m. she heard it again, the footsteps. But this time they didn't stop in the hallway. They came closer. She gripped the blanket, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. But it didn't. Instead, something else happened. From the corner of the room came the faint sound of creaking wood. The rocking chair. It was moving, slowly back and forth. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She reached over to wake Ethan, but before she could, the chair stopped. Dead still. The next morning, Ethan went to check it out. He looked at the chair, gave it a shake, and shrugged. "It's just loose joints," he said. "You probably just imagined it moving." But Claire knew what she'd seen. Or thought she had. Still, she tried to convince herself that maybe, somehow, he was right. Maybe the chair had just shifted on its own. Maybe the box of photos had been misplaced. Maybe the footsteps were her imagination. But 3 nights later, she realized it wasn't her imagination at all. Because at 3:12 a.m. she woke up to the sound of whispering. Not from the hallway. Not from outside. But from inside the room. At first, Claire thought it was the wind. It had that soft, uneven rhythm, like words just out of reach. But then she realized the windows were shut tight and the air felt still. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the corner of the room. She slowly sat up, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Ethan was still asleep, his steady breathing barely audible. The whispering grew clearer. It wasn't a single voice, it was layered, faint, like several people murmuring at once. She held her breath, straining to make out the words, but they were impossible to understand. Just a soft, low hum of human tones blending together. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. Claire sat frozen for what felt like minutes, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, she slowly laid back down, keeping her eyes open until the faint light of dawn began to creep through the window. By morning she looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Ethan noticed right away. "You didn't sleep again?" he asked, pouring her a cup of coffee. She shook her head. "I heard something. Whispering." Ethan set the mug down, concerned but trying not to show it. "Whispering. Like someone outside." "No. Inside. In our room." He frowned. "Claire, you've been under a lot of stress. Moving, work, new place, maybe your mind's just playing tricks." "I know what I heard," she said quietly. He reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "Okay. Tell you what, I'll check everything tonight before bed. Doors, windows, attic, everything. If there's anything weird, we'll deal with it. Sound good?" She nodded, but the uneasy feeling lingered. That night, true to his word, Ethan did a full check of the house. Every window was locked. Every door was secure. The attic was empty, just insulation and cobwebs. When they finally went to bed, Claire felt a little calmer. Maybe he was right, maybe she just needed rest. But around 2:30 a.m. she woke up again. Not to footsteps. Not to whispers. To a faint click. It came from the hallway. She turned her head just in time to see a thin strip of light appear under the door. The hallway light had turned on. Her stomach dropped. Ethan stirred beside her, blinking in confusion. "What is it?" "The light," she whispered. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, then swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Stay here." She wanted to stop him, tell him to just leave it until morning, but the words wouldn't come. She watched as he slowly opened the door. The light spilled into the room, harsh and bright. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. He stepped into the hallway, glancing around. Everything looked normal, the same family photos, the same rug, nothing out of place. He turned toward the light switch at the end of the hall. That's when he noticed something odd. The switch was already in the off position. He flipped it a few times, the light flickered but stayed on. "Claire?" he called. "I think there's a wiring issue or something." Then mid-sentence the light went out. The hallway was plunged into darkness. "Ethan?" Claire called softly. "I'm here," he said. She could hear the uncertainty in his voice now. He stepped back toward the bedroom, his hand brushing the wall to guide him. That's when he froze. Something brushed past him. It was quick, like a person moving silently through the dark, but cold, so cold that it made him shiver instantly. He reached out, but there was nothing there. Just air. He hurried back into the bedroom, shutting the door behind him. Claire was sitting up, eyes wide. "What happened?" "I don't know," he said. "It's probably just static. Air movement. I don't know." They left the light on the rest of the night. Neither of them slept much. The next morning, Ethan called an electrician. He explained that the hallway light kept flickering on by itself. The man came by that afternoon, checked the wiring, and found nothing wrong. "Everything looks new," he said. "No reason that light should come on unless someone's flipping the switch." Claire didn't say a word. She just nodded. That evening, Ethan suggested they take a short trip, maybe a weekend away just to clear their heads. Claire agreed, though she couldn't shake the strange attachment she felt to the house. Something about it didn't want them to leave. Before they packed, Claire decided to do one last sweep through the rooms. She moved through the kitchen, the living room, and finally up to the guest bedroom they rarely used. As she pushed open the door, she noticed a smell, faint, musty, like old wood and dust. The room was mostly empty except for a small dresser and that same old rocking chair, which had somehow been moved there from the living room. She frowned. "Ethan?" she called. "Yeah," he answered from downstairs. "Did you move the chair up here?" "No," he shouted back. "Why?" She didn't reply. Her heart began to race. She walked closer to the chair, studying it carefully. A thin layer of dust had gathered around its legs, except for two small areas as if someone had been standing there. And on the seat, she noticed something resting neatly in the center. It was the box of Polaroids. Her stomach turned. She picked it up carefully, half expecting it to vanish again, but it didn't. It felt solid, cold, almost damp. She opened it slowly. The same photographs were inside. Smiling families, birthday cakes, moments frozen in time. But there was one photo she hadn't seen before. It was of her, taken from the doorway of their bedroom. She was asleep, lying beside Ethan. The curtains behind her were drawn, and the timestamp printed on the bottom corner read 2:13 a.m., the same time she'd first heard the footsteps. The photo trembled in her hand. She dropped the box and stumbled backward, her breathing sharp and uneven. Ethan heard the crash and rushed upstairs. "What happened?" She pointed toward the floor, unable to speak. He picked up the photo, stared at it, then at her. "Claire, this isn't funny." "I didn't take it," she whispered. "Then who did?" Before she could answer, they both heard it, the slow, unmistakable sound of footsteps above them. Coming from the attic. Ethan's face drained of color. They stared at the ceiling, listening. Step after step, pacing slowly back and forth. Then silence. He took a deep breath, grabbed the flashlight from his phone and whispered, "Stay here." But before he could reach the attic door, the sound changed. The steps weren't above them anymore. They were on the stairs. The sound of footsteps coming down the stairs froze them both in place. Claire's fingers dug into Ethan's arm as they listened. Slow, steady, deliberate. One step. Then another. The air felt heavier with each creak of the wood. Ethan swallowed hard, holding his phone like a flashlight, the narrow beam shaking slightly in his hand. The light illuminated the hallway just enough for them to see the bottom of the staircase, but nothing was there. Still, the steps continued. "What do we do?" Claire whispered. Ethan hesitated. "Maybe someone broke in." She shook her head. "No, the doors were locked." The footsteps stopped just short of the last step. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every heartbeat sound too loud. Then softly came the faint sound of breathing. Not theirs, from the darkness near the staircase. A slow, shallow breath echoed, ragged and unsteady, like someone standing just out of sight. Ethan raised his phone higher, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam flickered slightly as it landed on the staircase. Empty. The breathing stopped. And then the light went out. Claire gasped. "Ethan." My phone just died," he said, his voice trembling. He pressed the button again and again, but the screen stayed black. They stood there in total darkness. Then a voice, low, whispery, almost a growl, came from the stairs. "Get out." Claire felt her blood turn cold. Ethan grabbed her hand and bolted toward the front door. The hallway lights began to flicker wildly as they passed. A picture frame fell from the wall, shattering across the floor. They reached the door, fumbling with the lock. It wouldn't budge. It was as if the metal had fused together. Behind them, the footsteps started again, faster this time. Ethan yanked harder. It stuck. Claire turned around, and for a split second she saw it, a tall, human-shaped figure standing halfway down the hall. Its outline was darker than the shadows around it. It didn't move. It didn't speak. She could only see its shape, and yet she could feel its stare. Only then did they look back. The house was quiet. The porch light flickered once and went out. Neither of them spoke. Ethan finally took out his phone, but the battery was full. It had never actually died. They spent the rest of the night in the car, parked at a gas station a few miles away. The next morning, they returned to the house with a local police officer. Inside, everything looked perfectly normal. No signs of forced entry. No footprints on the stairs. Nothing broken except for the picture frame. The officer took their statements, listened politely, then said what most people would. "Old houses make noise. Sometimes shadows play tricks. It's probably nothing serious." But when Claire mentioned the photographs, the officer's expression changed slightly. "Polaroids?" he asked. She nodded. "Dozens of them. Families who used to live here." He hesitated. "That's strange. The family before you left in a hurry. They said their daughter was having night terrors. I didn't think much of it at the time." He paused, then added quietly, "They never came back for their things." Ethan and Claire looked at each other. "Do you know where they went?" The officer shook his head. "They wouldn't say. Just that they couldn't stay another night in that house." After that day, Claire refused to sleep there again. She stayed at a hotel while Ethan tried to make sense of it all. He told himself there had to be a logical reason: stress, exhaustion, coincidence. But the moment he was alone in that house again, the feeling came back. The same cold air. The same silence that wasn't really silence. On the second night alone, he decided to confront it. He went upstairs around midnight, flashlight in hand, and stood in front of the attic door. He'd avoided it ever since that night, but something in him needed to know. He pulled the cord. The wooden ladder unfolded with a soft creak. Dust floated through the air as he climbed up. The attic was empty, just old beams, insulation, and a few forgotten boxes. He walked slowly across the floor, shining his light into the corners. That's when he noticed something written on one of the beams in faded black marker. It looked like a name. Sammy. Next to it, a small handprint. And beside that, a message written in uneven, childish handwriting. "Don't let him out." Ethan's breath caught. He backed away slowly, feeling the floor creak under him. Suddenly, he heard a faint rustling sound, like something shifting in the far corner. He turned his flashlight in that direction. There was a small trunk, half covered by an old sheet. He hesitated, then stepped closer and lifted the cloth. The trunk was locked with a rusty latch, but the wood was brittle. He pried it open. Inside were more photographs, hundreds of them. Families, children, different years. Some photos were torn or water damaged, but the same dark figure appeared in almost every one. And at the bottom of the box was something else, a small worn teddy bear. Its button eyes were missing and its fabric was stained. A faint smell of smoke lingered on it. He didn't touch it. He just stood there, staring until he heard the whisper again. Right behind him. "Don't let him out." Ethan spun around, the flashlight shaking wildly. No one was there. The air was ice cold. He stumbled backward, tripping over the trunk. The flashlight slipped from his hand, the beam flickering across the attic. For a split second he saw it again, that same tall shadow standing in the corner. Then everything went black. When Claire returned the next morning, the house was silent. Ethan's car was still in the driveway. His phone was on the counter. But he was gone. Police searched for days. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. No clues. The only thing they found was the trunk in the attic, now completely empty. Claire moved out the same week. She never set foot in that house again. The new owners arrived 6 months later, drawn by the low price and the charming neighborhood. They didn't know anything about Ethan or Claire. They didn't ask. But on their first night there, the wife woke up at exactly 2:13 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. When you move into a house surrounded by trees and silence, it's easy to think you've escaped the chaos of the world. No traffic, no neighbors, no noise, just peace. But sometimes the quiet can be the scariest thing of all. That's what Olivia and Mark discovered when they moved into the cabin on Pine Hollow Road. They'd been living in the city for years, cramped apartments, constant sirens, and endless rent increases. So when Olivia's aunt passed away and left her the cabin, it felt like fate. A chance to start over. It was a small wooden house about 20 miles from the nearest town. The road leading up to it was narrow and lined with tall pines that blocked most of the sunlight. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away. It was exactly what they thought they needed: quiet, private, and free. When they first arrived, everything seemed perfect. The air smelled cleaner and the silence felt almost calming. The cabin had old charm, hand-carved beams, a stone fireplace, and a porch that looked out over a small lake. "This is it," Olivia said, smiling as she stepped out of the car. "Our new life." Mark grinned. "I could get used to this." They unpacked, set up the essentials, and spent the first evening sitting by the fireplace, drinking wine and watching the reflection of the flames in the glass windows. It felt peaceful. But peace doesn't always last. The first strange thing happened 2 nights later. Olivia was brushing her teeth when she noticed something in the bathroom mirror. At first it looked like condensation, a faint, foggy outline near the corner. But as she looked closer, she realized it wasn't fog at all. It was a handprint. Small. Pale. And on the inside of the mirror. She blinked and it was gone. She told herself it was just steam from the shower. She didn't mention it to Mark. The next morning when they stepped outside they found something else strange. Footprints leading from the edge of the woods straight to their porch. Bare footprints. Small ones. They stopped right at the door. Mark frowned. Probably kids messing around? Olivia shook her head. There's no one around here, Mark. He didn't have an answer for that. Later that day they walked down to the lake to explore. The water was calm, perfectly still, reflecting the trees like a mirror. Near the edge, Olivia noticed something half buried in the mud, an old wooden toy. It was a tiny carved horse covered in dirt. When she picked it up, Mark gave her a look. Probably left by the previous owners. But when she turned it over, she saw something carved into the bottom. A single word, stay. That night, neither of them slept well. The wind outside sounded strange, too steady, too rhythmic, like a whisper moving through the trees. The cabin creaked, the walls groaned, and twice Olivia thought she heard footsteps on the porch. Mark checked, but no one was there. The next morning he noticed something odd. The front door, which they had locked, was open just a crack. Maybe you forgot to close it all the way, he said, trying to sound calm. I didn't, she replied firmly. He gave a small laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. All right, then maybe it's the wind. She didn't respond. But she could feel it, that same uneasiness growing stronger each day. By the end of the week, it wasn't just uneasiness anymore. It was fear. It started with the knocking. Always at 3:17 a.m. 3 slow knocks on the front door. The first time it happened, Mark jumped out of bed, thinking maybe an animal had bumped into the wood. He opened the door, flashlight in hand, but the porch was empty. Just the trees swaying in the cold wind. The second night it happened again. Same time. Same number of knocks. He checked again. Nothing. By the third night they didn't even move. They just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the knocks echo through the dark cabin. After that, the knocking stopped. But what replaced it was worse. One evening, Olivia was cooking when she heard soft humming coming from the back of the house. It was faint but clear, a child's voice humming a tune she didn't recognize. She froze, spoon in hand, and listened. The sound came from the small guest room they never used. She took a slow breath, walked down the hall, and opened the door. The room was empty. The humming stopped instantly. She backed away, shut the door, and turned to see Mark standing in the hallway. What's wrong? He asked. Did you hear that? She whispered. Hear what? The singing. He frowned. No. You're just tired, Liv. You've been up all night with these noises. We'll go into town tomorrow, get some rest. But that night, when the knocking came again, right at 3:17 a.m., he heard it too. They sat upright in bed, listening as the sound echoed through the house. 3 slow knocks. Pause. Then one more, faint and dragging, like a fingernail against wood. Mark grabbed the flashlight again. That's it. I'm catching whoever's doing this. Don't, Olivia started, but he was already at the door. He yanked it open and froze. On the porch stood a small wooden horse. The same one Olivia had found by the lake. Only this time it was clean. As if someone had just polished it. He picked it up slowly. Inside the base, where the word stay had been carved, there was now something else scratched into the wood. I am. He stared at it, speechless. Behind him, Olivia whispered, Mark, close the door. But before he could move, they both heard it, a quiet giggle coming from the darkness beyond the porch. A child's giggle. Mark dropped the toy and slammed the door. They locked every bolt, every latch, and pushed a chair under the handle for good measure. But the rest of the night, they heard soft footsteps circling the cabin. Sometimes they stopped right outside the bedroom window. The next morning they packed their bags. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Both of them knew they couldn't stay another night. As they loaded the last of their things into the car, Olivia turned for one final look. The cabin stood quiet under the trees, sunlight breaking through the branches. It almost looked peaceful again, harmless. Then she noticed something carved into the wooden frame of the front door. It hadn't been there before. 4 words, deep and uneven, etched into the wood like they'd been burned in. Don't leave me here. They drove away and never went back. Months later, when the property was listed for sale again, the real estate agent visited to take photos. When she stepped inside, she noticed a small toy horse sitting neatly on the fireplace mantel. Its carved message had changed one last time. Welcome home. After the cabin on Pine Hollow Road was finally sold, the new owners lasted less than 3 weeks before leaving. They said it was because of plumbing issues and foundation problems, but anyone who'd spent time in that part of town knew better. The locals had seen enough newcomers arrive with excitement and leave with fear in their eyes. Olivia and Mark never spoke publicly about what happened. Friends said they tried to move on, first renting an apartment near the city, then eventually separating quietly. They didn't argue, didn't fight. They just drifted apart, like two people who had seen something they couldn't unsee. But there was one detail Olivia couldn't let go of: the toy horse. A few months after they'd left the cabin, she found something waiting at their apartment door. A small brown box with no return address. Inside it was that same wooden horse wrapped in old paper. She stared at it for a long time, trying to convince herself it was a coincidence, but she knew it wasn't. She threw it away that night. The next morning it was sitting on her kitchen counter. After that she stopped sleeping at home. She left the city, stayed with relatives, and eventually changed her number. People said she was trying to start over, but those who knew her said she never really did. Sometimes when she talked about it she'd mention the cabin, how quiet it was, how peaceful it looked. And then she'd go silent, like she remembered something she didn't want to. That was the last anyone heard from her. For a while, it seemed like just another strange story in a small town full of them. But a few years later, another family moved into that same area, about 5 miles away, near the edge of a place called Alder Creek. They were the Thompsons, a young couple, Daniel and Mia, and their 7-year-old daughter, Ella. They weren't looking for quiet or isolation. They just wanted somewhere affordable where they could build a future. The real estate agent showed them a cozy 2-story house near the woods. It was older but well kept, with white paneling and a red front door. The previous owners had moved out in a hurry, leaving behind a few boxes in the attic. Daniel didn't think much of it. He was more focused on the deal. "We'll take it," he said, shaking the agent's hand. Mia loved the house instantly. She said it had character. Big windows, wooden floors, and a fireplace that still worked. It felt like the kind of place where they could make memories. Their daughter, though, wasn't so sure. On the first day, while unpacking in her new room, Ella asked, "Who's the man in the backyard?" Daniel turned sharply. "What man?" "The one by the trees," she said, pointing out the window. He looked outside. The yard was empty. Just a swing set, an old shed, and the thick line of trees beyond. "There's no one there, sweetheart," he said gently. She frowned but didn't argue. That night, after putting her to bed, Mia stood by the window for a moment. The trees looked darker than usual, the spaces between them too deep, like the woods were swallowing the light. She shook off the thought, blaming the long day and the lack of sleep. The next few weeks were normal, or at least they tried to be. Daniel started a new job nearby, Mia began decorating, and Ella settled into school. But every now and then little things would happen that didn't make sense. They'd find the back door unlocked in the morning, even though Daniel swore he checked it every night. A framed photo in the hallway kept falling, no matter how securely they nailed it. And then there was the smell. It was faint at first, earthy, damp, like wet soil. It would drift through the house without warning, then disappear just as quickly. One afternoon, while Mia was cleaning the living room, she noticed something odd about the wallpaper near the fireplace. A small corner had started to peel away. When she tugged at it, the paper came loose easily, revealing something underneath: writing. The words were faint, carved into the plaster. It took her a second to make them out. "He waits where the trees begin." She stepped back, her heart pounding. She didn't know why, but the phrase made her uneasy. That night she showed Daniel. He stared at the wall for a long moment, then laughed nervously. Probably a prank. The old owners must have done it. "Why would anyone write that?" she asked. He shrugged. "Kids maybe. Don't overthink it." But she couldn't stop thinking about it. Especially when she caught Ella standing by her bedroom window again a few days later, staring into the woods. "Sweetheart, what are you looking at?" Ella didn't turn around. "He's closer now." Mia felt her stomach twist. "Who?" "The man," she said softly. "He waves at me sometimes." Mia ran to the window. There was no one there. Just wind moving through the trees. She tried to stay calm, but that night, when Daniel came home, she told him everything. He listened carefully, then walked outside with a flashlight to check. He searched the yard, the trees, even the shed. Nothing. But when he turned to head back, he thought he saw movement, a faint shape slipping behind the trees. He stood there for a long moment, listening. Everything was quiet except for the sound of branches creaking. Then he heard it. A single, clear whistle, like someone trying to get his attention. He turned toward the sound, but the beam of his flashlight caught only fog. The air felt heavier. A low chill settled around him. He called out, "Who's there?" No answer. When he got back inside, Mia could tell something had shaken him. He didn't say much that night. He just locked every door and closed the blinds. After that, the house felt different. The air inside seemed colder even during the day. Sometimes they'd wake up to find the front porch light flickering. Other nights, they'd hear faint knocking sounds coming from the walls. Mia started researching the house, trying to find out who had lived there before. What she found only made things worse. The property records showed the house had been vacant for nearly 6 years before they bought it. The last registered owners had been a couple who disappeared without explanation. Their car was found abandoned near Pine Hollow Road, the same area where Olivia and Mark's cabin had been. And in the old listing photos from that sale, Mia noticed something in the background of one picture. Near the edge of the trees, half hidden in shadow, was a small figure. A child. Holding a wooden toy horse. She stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling. That night, she woke up suddenly, unsure why. The house was quiet. Daniel was asleep beside her. Then she heard it, faint at first, then clearer. A child's laughter echoing from downstairs. She froze. Slowly she sat up and listened again. The sound was coming from the living room. Then she heard something else. 3 slow knocks. She turned toward the window and for a brief second she thought she saw movement, a reflection of someone standing just outside near the trees. She blinked and it was gone. When she finally managed to fall asleep again, she dreamed of the cabin on Pine Hollow Road, the one she'd never seen but somehow recognized. In the dream, the front door was open, the same toy horse sitting on the porch. And carved above the doorway were 2 words that didn't make sense. "We're home." The days that followed felt heavy for Mia. She couldn't shake the dream, or the uneasiness that seemed to cling to her even in sunlight. She didn't tell Daniel everything, just that she'd heard noises, maybe from the wind or the house settling. He brushed it off gently, the way someone does when they're trying to keep things normal. But she could tell by the way he checked the locks every night that he didn't completely believe himself either. During the next week, the smell in the house grew stronger. It wasn't constant, it would come and go like a faint warning. Sometimes it smelled like damp wood. Other times, it was sharper, like something had been burning a long time ago. The air inside the house began to feel stale, no matter how often Mia opened the windows. Ella started waking up at odd hours, sitting on her bed with her blanket clutched tight. When Mia would ask what was wrong, she'd whisper, "He doesn't like the noise." "What noise, sweetheart?" Mia asked one night. "The house," Ella said. "When it creaks." Mia felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Did he tell you that?" Ella nodded, her eyes wide and sleepy. "He says the trees remember." That night, Mia sat awake for hours, scrolling through local forums and news archives. She searched for anything connected to Pine Hollow Road, Alder Creek, or disappearances near the woods. Most of what she found were vague stories, the kind people post half-seriously, shadows in windows, laughter in the trees, and something about the hollow ones. It was late when she came across an old newspaper scan from nearly 20 years earlier. The headline read, "Local man missing after discovering hidden room beneath house." The article described a small farmhouse that had stood not far from where their house now was. The man had told friends he found a trapdoor under his living room floor, leading to a hidden space filled with old furniture, children's toys, and something he described as marks carved into the walls. He disappeared 2 days later. The property was eventually torn down and new homes were built in the area, including theirs. When Mia told Daniel about it, he tried to stay calm, but the unease was clear on his face. "You think there's something under our house?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But what if there is?" They decided to check. That evening, Daniel pulled up the rug in the living room and began tapping the floorboards. Most sounded solid until one spot near the fireplace echoed slightly hollow. He pried it up carefully and beneath it was a small square of older wood, a trapdoor just like the article described. They looked at each other. "Should we open it?" Mia asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He pulled on the handle and the door lifted with a dry groan. A rush of cold, stale air escaped from below. He shined his phone flashlight down. A narrow set of wooden steps disappeared into darkness. "I'll go first," he said. She wanted to stop him, but curiosity won. The steps creaked under his weight as he descended. The air grew colder, heavier. When his light finally hit the floor, he saw stone walls and an old dirt floor. It was small, maybe the size of a bedroom. But what stood out were the carvings. Dozens of them. Lines, symbols, and phrases scratched into the stone. Most were unreadable, but one phrase repeated over and over. "They were here before." Mia covered her mouth as she came down behind him. The carvings looked old, some covered in dust, others fresh. In the far corner was something else, a small wooden chair. On the seat, a single toy horse rested on its side, one leg cracked. Mia stepped back. "Daniel, how is that possible?" He didn't answer. His flashlight flickered for a second, then steadied. That's when they both heard it, a soft sound like humming. It came from somewhere behind the wall. Daniel froze, listening. The humming stopped. Then came a faint scratching noise. Mia grabbed his arm. "Let's go. Now." They climbed back up, closing the trapdoor and covering it with the rug. Neither of them said much after that. That night, they slept with the lights on, pretending they could make sense of what they'd found. The next day, Daniel went to work early, but Mia couldn't stay in the house. The quiet felt alive. So she packed a bag and took Ella to her sister's place across town. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly. But Daniel didn't. He stayed behind to finish some repairs, determined to prove that everything they were feeling was just stress and coincidence. But late that evening, as he sat in the living room, he began hearing faint footsteps above him, slow, careful, pacing. He called out, thinking maybe Mia had come back early. No answer. He checked upstairs, but the rooms were empty. When he came back down, the rug near the fireplace had been moved aside. The trapdoor was open. He stood still for a long time, listening. The air coming from below was colder than before. He crouched, peering into the darkness. "Hello," he said. The reply was quiet but clear. "Hello." He dropped the flashlight. When Mia came home the next day, the house was silent. The trapdoor was closed again. Daniel's phone was still on the kitchen counter. She called for him, checked every room, even the basement. Nothing. There were no signs of struggle, just his shoes by the door and his jacket hanging where it always was. She called the police. They searched the area, even brought dogs, but there was no trace of him. They said he must have walked out. But Mia knew that wasn't true. That night, Ella sat on her bed, staring at the wall. "He's not gone, Mommy," she whispered. "He's with them now." "Who?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "The ones in the trees." After that, Mia moved out of the house and never went back. But sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and think she heard humming through the walls. Years later, when the property was resold, the new owners mentioned the same smell, damp earth, faint and constant. They also mentioned finding carvings under the wallpaper, strange phrases, and drawings of stick figures holding hands in front of trees. The real estate agent said it was probably leftover from before the renovations. The buyers didn't seem worried. They just wanted a fresh start. They moved in by autumn. A young couple again, excited about a new life, new space, and a new house that felt like it had stories to tell. And that's where the third story begins, with another home not far from the others, built on the same soil that had watched too many families come and go. This one was newer, brighter, more modern. But as the saying goes in towns like Alder Creek, new walls don't keep old things out. The new couple was Adam and Claire. They were in their early 30s, newly married, and thrilled to finally own their first home. It was modern, freshly painted, and filled with light. Claire loved the open kitchen and big backyard, while Adam was drawn to the quiet. No traffic, no city noise, just the sound of wind through the trees. From the first day, it felt like a fresh start. They unpacked, laughed, and talked late into the night about how this house would be their forever home. Everything felt perfect, almost too perfect. It was about 2 weeks later when Claire noticed the first strange thing. It wasn't something obvious. Just small, forgettable moments that only made sense later. One morning, she woke early and went downstairs to make coffee. The air felt colder than usual, even though the heater was running. She glanced at the thermostat, it read normal. But when she exhaled, she could see her breath. She brushed it off. Maybe a glitch. But when she turned toward the window, she noticed something in the reflection. For just a second, it looked like someone was standing behind her. She spun around, nothing there. That same evening, Adam heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway when Claire was still upstairs. Slow, steady, like someone walking barefoot on the wooden floor. He waited, expecting Claire to appear. But she didn't. When he finally called her name, she answered from the bedroom upstairs. After that, the noises became more frequent. Footsteps, faint knocks, the occasional whisper of something that didn't quite sound like wind. Still, they tried to ignore it. Every house has sounds, they told themselves. Pipes, floorboards, temperature shifts, logical explanations. But then came the smell. It was the same earthy scent that had haunted the previous homes, damp soil mixed with something faintly sweet. It would drift in during the night, strongest near the living room. Claire started keeping the windows shut, but it didn't help. The smell didn't come from outside anymore. It came from under the floor. One night, while Adam was away for work, Claire heard humming, soft, low, like a child's tune. It seemed to come from inside the walls. She pressed her ear against the living room paneling, heart pounding. The sound stopped instantly. Then came a faint tapping right where her head rested. She jumped back, grabbing her phone, but before she could call anyone, she heard a small thud near the fireplace. She turned, and saw the rug slightly move, just a ripple as if air had passed beneath it. That was when she noticed a faint outline near the base of the fireplace. The rug had covered it before, a square shape almost like a door. She felt an instinctive pull to lift it, but fear held her frozen. She stood there for a long moment before forcing herself upstairs. She locked the bedroom door and stayed awake until dawn, listening for every creak and sound. When Adam came home the next day, she told him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't even try to explain it away. Instead, he said something that made her blood run cold. "I think I've seen that door too," he said quietly. "In my dreams." He explained that for the past week he'd been dreaming about a dark space, walls covered in carvings, whispers echoing from somewhere unseen. And every time he turned, there was a wooden toy horse sitting in the corner. Claire felt the color drain from her face. "A horse?" He nodded. "Yeah. Like one of those old ones kids used to play with." Neither of them slept well after that. The dreams got worse. Claire started hearing the same humming in her sleep, like it was following her from room to room. Sometimes she'd wake up and see faint handprints on the fogged window, small and pale. Adam began researching the property. He wanted answers, and he found them, or at least pieces of something that didn't fit together cleanly. The records showed their house sat right between two others that had been demolished years earlier. One on Pine Hollow Road, another near Alder Creek. Both were connected by the same builder, a company that no longer existed. But stranger than that, all three properties shared the same original owner from nearly a century ago. A man named Elias Wren. There wasn't much about him, just fragments of stories. A reclusive land developer who built homes on land no one else wanted. Forested, quiet, cheap. Locals said he lived out there for years, long after everyone else left. Some said he was obsessed with the soil, always digging, always building cellars and rooms underground. And then one night he vanished. His house burned down, but the foundations remained. That was where the new developments were later built. When Adam showed Claire what he found, she just stared at the screen. So all of this, the smell, the noises, they'd been happening for years. He nodded. Different families. Same ground. That night, the power went out during a storm. The whole house went dark. The wind howled through the trees, rain hammering against the windows. Claire lit a few candles and tried to stay calm while Adam checked the breaker. Minutes passed. He didn't come back.